Hey team, what you got?
Hey, what's up, Matt? So I think there's a common theme in a lot of our conversations, which is nutrition for well-being.
hmm
And since I do have a PhD in biochemistry, I thought, why don't we talk a little bit about biochemistry? And in our last episode that we recorded with Jason, I don't know in what order we will publish them, so I don't know. But we talked a lot about biology already and genetics and so on. But I thought maybe we should talk a little bit more on the metabolism side of things, and I think could be interesting, and maybe we'll learn something.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't know exactly how to do this. I don't want to give a lecture, so maybe we'll start with why do we need to eat in the first place. So maybe you want to tell me why you think we need to eat.
I mean, we definitely need energy, right? So
Energy, yeah, energy is good.
there's that, and I mean, combined with energy, you have a need for specific substances like minerals, vitamins,
Yeah, yeah,
aspects, nutrients, let's call them, that our body needs to function.
yeah,
That's what
exactly.
I know.
Very good. So, yeah, you touched upon, I think, most of the important things. There's what we call macronutrients and micronutrients, right? So, the macronutrients are the ones that we consume for energy, and there's three classes, and you probably know them. So, there's lipids or fats, there's carbohydrates, and sometimes you can call them sugars, but sugars are technically short chain carbohydrates. We'll talk about that in a second. And then there's proteins. And each of them can be used for energy, but each of them also has specific functions and also has a specific effect on your hormonal levels and on your metabolism's behavior. And then there's micronutrients, and there's a number of different forms of micronutrients. There's the minerals that you've already mentioned. Then there's vitamins, and there's some essential nutrients that could fall also in the macronutrient classes, but differ a little bit because they can be used as energy, but they can also be used for other things. For example, essential fatty acids and essential amino acids. They can be used for energy, but they can also be used as precursors for other molecules that have an important function. So we'll talk about all of these, and then I don't know if you have questions, of course.
I do. I mean, I guess, the first distinction is, so you're talking about macro and micro.
Hmm.
Is
Hmm.
that related to, like, why are they call it that way? Like, is there a specific reason
I
why?
mean, I'd have to look up to be sure not to say the wrong thing, but I would say macro and micro are the amounts you need to consume to
Okay.
live. So macronutrients you need like hundreds of grams per day, right? You need,
hmm
I think, I don't know what a normal person eats. Let's say a kilo per day, maybe two, right, of nutrients. I mean, a lot of it is water. So water is actually a different thing. We should water. Maybe water is like the third side of this because you need to consume water also, even though funnily enough, like human bodies and animal bodies in general produce water. We need to consume more water than we produce actually because we lose water through excretion and
Mm.
sweating, right? Like so sweating because like just we exercise, and actually humans, funnily enough, are just one of very few animals that even sweat in the first place. And so
Okay.
humans and horses are famous to sweat, but for example, dogs can't sweat, and that's why they do this. I don't even know what the word is. You know the rapid breathing they do when they're like working out. They do like
Yeah.
that. Yeah, they do that actually to cool themselves down because they can't sweat.
Yeah, that makes
Yeah,
sense.
it's super interesting. Um, so they they
I
they
thought it was like, isn't related to oxygen, like
it is
humans?
it is both. It is both.
Okay.
But when you see them, they have their mouth wide open with the tongue hanging out. It's to dissipate heat,
Mm.
which we can do through our skin, through evaporating our sweat. But dogs can't do it. Dogs just don't sweat, and or at least they don't sweat a lot, not enough to like cool themselves down.
Okay.
Horses and humans do, and that's why humans need to drink much more water than other animals. And also it's related to our kidneys also, so I don't want to say the wrong thing there. But for example, a cat can survive without drinking, basically. Like a cat basically never has to drink. Like I used to have a cat when I was a kid, and it never had to drink. The moisture it got from its food was enough to survive. It never drank. Basically never. Sometimes it did, maybe when it was sick or something. But
hmm
um, because its kidney is very good at excreting salts, and our kidney is not as good at excreting salts. But like electrolyte balance, that's a different discussion a little bit. But we talk a little bit about electrolyte and water balance when we talk about micronutrients.
Wait. I have a question about. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't want to get into like the animal kingdom, but cats, so they pee, right? So
Yeah.
that's on one end. So there's a clear like output of water,
Yes.
and
Yes.
the input comes from food,
The input
or
comes from food and from their own body. So
Mhm.
all animals that breathe oxygen produce water. I don't know if you remember from school. There's like this chemical equation. Uh, Glucose and oxygen turn into CO2 and water.
Hmm.
That's kind of the basic energy balance equation. And so there's energy, and this is actually it's a good topic, because like, so the macronutrients you consume, they contain energy that is bound in the molecules of these macronutrients. So they're proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. And carbohydrates are things like starch and sugars. And let's talk about carbohydrates first, because it's the easiest one, because our main the main source of our energy is glucose, which is just the simplest form
Mhm.
of sugar, right? Glucose is, I don't know, I think there's like a there's a kind of like a common word for glucose that is more like colloquial. I don't know, I don't remember it. In German it's actually, we say grape sugar, and so there's grape
Okay.
sugar and fruit sugar. I don't know. Anyway, um,
Yeah, there's fruit sugar for sure, and
so fruit sugar is fructose,
fructose. Yeah.
and glucose it's a different molecule, and fructose and glucose together are saccharose or sucrose, and
Hmm.
sucrose is the regular table sugar, right? Like the sugar you put in everything, that's
It has a bottle
sucrose, and it's
with a bottle.
composed of glucose and fructose. But it doesn't matter for our discussion. I think, like, I don't want to get deep into the details. The main sugar for our metabolism is glucose. We can also metabolize fructose, but the main one is glucose, and that's why we measure, like, our blood sugar. We measure the glucose in our blood. We don't measure the fructose in our blood, because
Hmm.
the main molecule in the center of our metabolism is glucose, and that's where a lot of the energy metabolism starts. So starch, right? So in your potatoes is just a chain of glucose molecules stuck together in a long chain, and this chain doesn't taste sweet because it's a long chain. And this is actually an interesting experiment that you can do at home, is to put something starchy in your mouth, so either bread or potatoes or whatever, or pasta, and if you chew it for a long time, let's say 5 minutes, and you keep it in your mouth, it will start tasting sweet, because the starch gets broken up into glucose, which tastes sweet, but starch doesn't taste sweet, right? So
Right. Starch contains glucose. That's what you're saying.
exactly.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, it is made up of glucose. It's just glucose that's on a string,
That's
right?
why because basically carbohydrates are sugar in a way.
Exactly. There's sugar. Carbohydrates are sugars stitched together in long chains.
So, and that opens another question. When they say there's all this debate about, not debate really, like this clarity, I think at this point,
Hmm.
whether you have refined carbs or
Hmm. Hmm.
non-refined
Yeah,
carbs,
that's
and the
yeah.
fact that they're healthier non-refined carbs because it takes what I gather, right? I'm completely wrong, could be right. That non-refined carbs take, like, the body takes longer to absorb non-refined carbs, so there's slower pace of uh, glucose being um absorbed by your
Yep.
bloodstream. Is that
Correct,
the case?
correct. Yeah, correct. There's a number of things happening there. So I'm aware of at least three components there. So starch, let's say you eat pure starch, it will spike your blood sugar, right? Your blood sugar is your glucose levels in your blood, because your digestive system turns it into glucose and then absorbs it, and it will spike your blood sugar. But as you say, if you consume, and I actually did this experiment on myself back in university. So we had like a drink of glucose, pure glucose, and the spike is crazy. It's super quick, right? There's a huge
Mhm.
spike of glucose in your blood, and it also then that spikes insulin levels and so on. And there's the whole hormonal and insulin sensitivity discussion around this, and diabetes and so on, and obesity, and why it's bad to spike your glucose a lot. So that's why sweets are worse than like other starch, like other carbohydrates, like starches, but it still does spike your blood sugar. Just the spike is less intense, right? So instead of going like super steeply up and down, it goes slowly up and slowly down, right? There's that thing. Then there's the fact that it tastes sweet will also cause your blood sugar to rise. And that's funny because, like, as far as I'm aware, I might be wrong, but what I remember is that even sweeteners can slightly spike your blood sugar because they taste sweet. Um, so this is interesting. But the main thing actually of, processed versus unprocessed is that there's other things in your food that will reduce the absorption rate. For example, fiber. So if you or fat, right? And actually, if you say you eat a potato, just a pure potato, it will spike your blood sugar because it has starch. But if you consume the potato together with, let's say,
Right.
cheese or like olive oil or whatever, it will spike your blood sugar less quickly because there's other things in there.
That's
So
why if you are at risk for diabetes or pre-diabetes, you have all these rules of like what do you eat with
exactly.
what else,
So
right? Yeah.
they're trying to reduce the what is called the glycemic index of your food, and the glycemic index is maximal, I think, for just pure glucose, and it's a little lower for starch because starch gets absorbed more slowly because it needs to be broken down. But if there's other things with your food, like let's say more water, more fiber, more fat, it will also get absorbed more slowly, even more slowly, and that's why someone with diabetes is supposed to eat less pure starch and more mix the starch with some fiber and fat, and that way the blood sugar will spike less quickly.
Mm.
um, so yeah, that is one thing. And so there's, I think, just like to touch upon the processed versus unprocessed food. I think to my understanding, there's two reasons why unprocessed food tends to be better than processed food. One is that processed food tends to get rid of some nutrients, right? So, and also like the balance of different components of the food. So, for example, if it's pure sugar versus sugar and fiber together,
Hmm.
for example, a good example is fruit juice is actually not good for your health, but fruit
Hmm.
is good for your health. And the reason is that fruit juice is just very sugary, but fruit has a lot of fiber also, which means,
Mm.
and the vitamins and so on.
That's
Um,
why the having a blender is okay. Using a blender is
yeah,
okay to create a juice,
yeah.
but using a what's called
A
the other
juicer, a
tool,
juicer.
the juicer, yeah,
Yeah,
because the
because
juicer basically,
it gets rid of all the other nice stuff in there, and not all of it, but like some of it. Obviously, Coca-Cola is still worse than an
yeah,
orange juice, right? No question. But orange juice is much worse than an orange, because of all the fiber and so on. And um,
makes sense.
yeah, and then the second component of processed food is the addition of things that are not supposed to be there, right? So one is the removal of things that are supposed to be there. The other one is the addition of things that are not supposed to be there, like preservatives, maybe contaminants, like from the industrial
Right.
processes, like heavy metals, which are really, really bad, and plastics. So all these things are something to keep in mind, but it's on the border of our discussion. So hold on, I need to sneeze. Maybe. Okay,
But
it's tingling.
I have a question there because there's another. I guess that's more of a debate instead. Still to this day, frozen food, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So you have one faction that says frozen food is actually better because your micronutrients that are part of the food are actually well maintained in lower temperature, and
yeah,
so when you heat it up, you basically have it like if it were just fresh from nature, right?
yeah, yeah,
While others are saying, but you're actually altering the state of the food itself. So is it really healthy? And there's all that discussion about like how many times can you unfrozen and
yeah,
unfreeze
yeah,
and freeze again? Like,
yeah.
what's your take on
Yeah,
that?
I can say a lot about that. So I wonder if we should wait with that until we talked about the other nutrients, but I can touch upon it already. What do you think?
No, no, it's fine. I think we can flow with it, and then
Okay. So there's a couple of things that happen. So first of all, food contains, as I said, macronutrients and micronutrients. So there's the things that your body needs from the food are the fats, the fibers, the fat, the sugars or carbohydrates, and the proteins, and you need all three, right? Um,
Mhm.
I think technically you could survive on only a protein diet, but you cannot live without protein. You will die for sure. I think technically you could survive without sugar or without carbohydrates and without fats, but you're not going to be very healthy. You should have all three for sure. You cannot survive without micronutrients. You will die. Okay, if you don't get your minerals, if you don't get your vitamins, if you don't get your essential amino acids and so on, you will die. Like your body cannot function without them, because your body needs them to function properly. And I'll talk about how that how it uses these different molecules a little later. As for freezing, so as far as I'm aware, and I should always say, like, up to the knowledge that I have on this, and there might be new studies on this, but as far as I'm aware, frozen food and canned food usually is more nutritious than fresh food in our society. The reason is that the way fresh food is produced isn't very great in Western society, because a lot of times it's like sometimes genetically manipulated food, but there's a different debate about this. It can be good and can be bad. Sometimes it's good, but oftentimes, for example, you get not very ripe fruit or ripe vegetables, because they have long transport chains. So it's like they're harvested too early, right, to produce all the
Right.
nutrients, and then they're shipped and so on. But what happens to, for example, and I remember one study on canned tomatoes versus fresh tomatoes, that at least in Western society, canned tomatoes are much more nutrient dense, because they let them ripe much more on the plant and then put them directly into the cans, versus shipping them, unripened, and then they just have like a fake ripening process on the way, without getting sun, without getting the nutrients from the soil and so on. So there's
Makes sense.
that. So
You see that happening with bananas, right? You go
yeah,
in the store and you see bananas there, like still green
yeah,
because they
exactly,
got
yeah,
here too
yeah.
fast. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and then so the freezing part, and then there's a long discussion, and there's also, I think there's a separate discussion for like heating up your food, which is there's the microwave discussion, and in my opinion, actually, microwave is better for your food than your oven. But that's a totally different discussion, but we can touch upon it later also.
Why? Because of the
Because the microwave doesn't usually heat your food as much, and it doesn't directly heat the nutrients that can just get destroyed. So let's talk about that. So the nutrients that are in your food that can get destroyed. Okay, so minerals cannot get altered. They cannot. So any minerals in the
okay.
food, they will not change unless you like filter them out somehow. So if you
But they could go away, right? You could like
only, but they have to go somewhere. If you take a bunch of food, you freeze it, the minerals will not go anywhere, right? They'll still, like, you put your food in a bag, you freeze it, the minerals are still in the bag. If you consume all of it, if you like do like a juicer and you separate different things, then you could lose some minerals,
okay,
right?
fine.
But like once the minerals are in there and you consume the thing, you will consume the minerals. Okay.
So when people say you're losing your micronutrients if you don't eat it too fast enough, they're talking about vitamins, not minerals.
I think more likely than not, they talk about vitamins. So there's a couple of things that can happen to food that stands around. Okay, so let's talk about that. So alteration of the nutrients. There is contamination, bacterial contamination. So bacteria can grow, and that's bad, right? So usually that's bad. It's not always bad, because fermentation is also when bacteria grow. So when you ferment your food, it can be good because it. So
Right.
again, different discussion. But so what happens to like kimchi or cheese or so on? Bacteria grow on it, or yogurt, right? They grow on it, and they can be good for you, right? The bacteria themselves can be healthy because they grow in your gut and they make your gut healthy. But they can also break down certain molecules in the food that are not easily digestible by a human, and then make them more easily digestible by the human, because they have different enzymes than humans, and they can help us um, digest them better, right? That's one thing. But more often than not, if you just leave food around, it grows mold or it grows bacteria or whatever. That's bad, because you will get sick. The reason you get sick is not because they break down the nutrients, it's because they produce toxins which make us sick.
So fermenting food is actually a controlled way of producing mold.
Exactly. No, not mold. So mold is a different thing than bacteria. So there's fermentation that is done with molds. There's fermentation that's done with bacteria, and there's fermentations done with fungi. A mold is also, and this is like microbiology. I'm not super good on it, but like molds are not the same as fungi, or maybe they're part of fungi, but they're not the same. So usually, what we use for fermentation is yeast. In many fermentations, yeast is used to produce beer, to produce
Right.
I think kombucha is both bacteria and yeast, if I'm not mistaken. Yogurt is fermented with bacteria. Cheese, I think, is bacteria. Probably, it's probably similar bacteria to yogurt. I think like there's bacteria that like to grow on milk
Mm.
products, and that's that's like the ones that are in yogurt and cheese. And then kombucha is tea that is fermented with yeast and bacteria. And wine, wine is fermented with yeast and bacteria, and beer is just yeast, I think. So yeah, there's lots of types of fermentation, and fermentation happens all the time. And if you just leave your food out and it
Mm.
grows mold
Right.
or goes bad, it's also fermentation, but it's not controlled fermentation, right? And the controlled is important because we control which organisms grow on it,
It's
and
micro.
some of them produce toxins and some of them don't. So some bacteria will make you sick and some will not make you sick. That's it. It's just the way, it's
Okay.
just a type of bacteria on there, and also maybe sometimes the type of food. But mold usually is not good. There's some exceptions, like
But then again, there
yeah,
are like molds and molds, right? Like
yeah,
there's some
exactly.
molds that are not so harmful for you, and
Exactly,
others
yeah.
that are like super harmful.
Like cheese, some cheese has mold, right? Like
Yeah.
the camembert and so on, right? They have mold on top, and
Yeah.
it's a benign mold. Like there's a benign cancer. It will not make you sick, but some people might not tolerate it. So depending on your digestion, some people might not like it. And but that's that's a different thing. So but bacteria and molds are, when they grow on your food, they're bad because they produce toxins, not because they get rid of your nutrients. Usually they can
Okay.
get rid of some nutrients, but that's not the problem. So when you leave food, things happen to it, and depending on the nutrients, different things happen to it. But there's generally two things that happen to your nutrients, and usually, as you said, it's your either your essential amino acids or fatty acids or your vitamins that can break down. And what happens is oxidation. So it's oxygen, and we talked about this with Jason in the other podcast.
Yeah.
Oxygen is super toxic to everything. It breaks down everything, and water actually is also super, aggressive. So there's something called hydrolysis, which is another thing that can happen. So you have a molecule, it can get attacked by oxygen, and it can get attacked by water and break down. That's why, and this is very important, things that are in water break down much more easily than things that are dry, and things that are in contact with oxygen break down more easily than things that are contained in a vacuum bag or something, because oxygen
Mhm.
breaks them down. And it is also
That's
like,
why vacuum, right? So you
exactly, and the
vacuum
bacteria
food.
so
Mm.
if you have something in a can, right, your can of tomatoes or beans, it can stay on your shelf for years, and it never goes bad, because you keep away the bacteria, you keep away the mold, and you keep away the oxygen,
Mm.
and you keep away light. And that's the last one. Light can also destroy your food. So electromagnetic radiation in general, but light in particular, will destroy also everything. So good examples: if you leave your bike out in the rain, it for a long time, it will rust. This
Right.
is oxygen attacking the iron in your bike. And the same thing happens to food. If you leave food out, oxygen will start attacking it. So your food is rusting, in a way, you could say that. But also there's more things happening because bacteria grow on it. So like composting, right? Bacteria will break it down. And then light will also attack it, and that you can see if you, for example, if you leave like a something colorful, like a chair or like a shirt or whatever, in the sun for a
Yeah,
long
it
time,
loses color.
it will
Mm.
bleach, right? And what happens is that the sun breaks down the color molecules in your shirt or whatever, and that's exactly what happens if you leave food out in light. It will break down the molecules in the food. And very good example, I'm gonna give you some examples. Olive oil or other oils with essential fatty acids. So we often talk about the unsaturated fatty acids that are the healthy
Hmm.
ones, right?
Hmm.
They have something called double bonds in their chains, and these easily react with oxygen and with light to break down.
That's why you have like olive oil bottles that are never transparent, right? Because
Exactly,
it's
exactly. So
that makes total sense.
olive oil is supposed to be in dark glass always. It's actually, the best thing would be to have it in something completely
Like
opaque.
metallic, like sometimes you have
Yeah,
it like
but
in,
the reason they don't do it, I think, is because you want to see how much is in there, I guess. But
yeah.
like, I think green glass is already pretty good. Brown or green glass, like very dark glass, makes it such that most of the light doesn't go in. And also, if once you open the olive oil, it will go bad more quickly, right? So if you open it, oxygen will get in, and the oxygen will react with the oils and turn them into.
But so I have a couple of follow-up questions then, because oxygen is part of the bottle, like is inside of the bottle anyway when they cook. It's just that
I don't think
movement
it is.
of
I don't think it is. I think when they produce it, they try. So I don't know what the producers do. I can tell you what we. So back in one of the companies I worked at, we actually did produce oils, and what we did to protect the oils is, either you fill up the bottle to the top, so there's no air, right? That's one thing you can do. But something else you can do, and this is actually something that is done in some industries. I don't know if it's done in the food industry, but I can imagine, is to fill the little rest of the bottle with nitrogen instead of air. Pure
okay.
nitrogen, and nitrogen is inert, so it doesn't do anything to your olive oil or to your food. It doesn't react. It's just, nitrogen is also in our air anyway. It's basically air where the oxygen is removed. So once you open it, it has oxygen, but I think before you open it, it might not have any
Okay,
oxygen.
but then the second follow-up question, the more it's why is this not happening so much in the refrigerator? Like refrigerator is oxygen, right?
Yeah,
Like
very good question.
why food is not rotting so fast in the
Okay, very
refrigerator?
good question. Couple of things. First of all, this is not. Oh, I'll tell you the big reason first. But the big reason is that it's cold, right? So the fact that it's cold will make things happen more slowly. And this is a general rule in chemistry. Temperature makes things happen more quickly. Anything that will happen anyway happens more
Like
quickly.
higher temperature means quicker
Exactly.
happenings.
Temperature is just a measure of speed. Literally, in physics, temperature is just the speed of the molecules. So
Right.
once you take away their speed, everything is just, it's like actually slowing down time. That's why you can freeze a human body, and technically, right? We're not there yet, but you can freeze some animals and wake
Cryogenics.
them.
So okay, so
Exactly. So
okay.
freezing just means slowing down time in the most literal sense. It's actually crazy. It's actually kind of like a time machine. Freezing is a time machine. Once you freeze something, stuff stops happening in that thing. So that's why if you put something in the freezer, it will basically stay good forever, basically, right? And the colder you get, the more you slow down. So if you go to absolute zero, like there's a temperature called absolute zero, which is minus 273 degrees Celsius, nothing is happening. Nothing. Your molecules stop moving, so nothing is happening. And the higher it gets, the more they move. And if you once you get to like 1,000 degrees, like all the reactions happen so quickly that the food burns, right? So it's just a quick reaction, but it's everything sped up. Okay, so it's just so the general processes are
So
slowed
we're
down.
getting to the why cooking tends to like
Break down stuff. Exactly.
altered
Yeah.
state of.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say a couple of more things on the fridge. The cooling down not only like slows down the natural breaking down of things, but even more importantly, it slows down bacteria. And this is actually the more important thing, because bacteria and mold and so on, they like to grow around 20, 30 degrees Celsius, right? So they like to grow in regular temperatures. If you lower the temperature, they don't like it. They just stop growing. So that's actually
I
that
guess
is the main
because
reason.
everything stops and stops them as well, right?
Exactly. But also like different organisms prefer
Prefer
different
different
temperature prefer
habitats,
different
right?
temperatures.
Yeah.
Some organisms like the cold, some organisms like the heat, but very few organisms like ice. Almost no organism lives on ice. There are a few, but like very, very few. Right? If you go to the Antarctica, like there's very few living things. There are a few, but very few. And so that is actually the main reason. So there's three things: no bacteria growing or slower, the natural processes of oxidation and hydrolysis and so on, they stop because like you slow down everything. And the third one we should also mention is that fridges are dark inside. They're light when you open, but when you close them, there's no light.
True.
That's the third
True.
thing. So those three things make your food last longer. So
Okay.
as for like let me,
So
yep.
another question about altering state. So they say, today I'm like bringing
Who's they?
all the common sense, common knowledge,
Yeah,
right? And I have others with food. We can talk about them. But so one very popular is you should not take anything from the freezer and put it on a pan directly, because it's better to let it like unfreeze naturally and then heat it up if you want. Is that something that has any scientific proof? Like that you're aware
I
of?
think it depends on what it is and what the reason told by the people is. So oftentimes with things that people say in society, oftentimes there's a truth to it, but the reason why they think it's true is not true. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's some good examples that I hear all the time. So for example, palm oil, like I have this discussion a lot, and palm oil is very bad for the environment, right? And then I think people like realized that palm oil is bad, and then at some point people started saying it's bad for your health, which it's not.
Yeah.
It's not bad for your health. It's just bad for the environment. But I think people like at some point they forget why something is bad, so they just say it's bad. And I think the same is true for
Well,
like
probably it was
yeah.
easier as propaganda to say it's
Yeah,
bad
yeah,
for your health
yeah,
than,
probably.
but yeah, but it
But I
makes
think
sense.
it's probably similar for that. I think so. I don't know why people say that. I can make some assumptions. So I think, for example, it depends. I think it depends what it is. Firstly, let's say you freeze a steak. I think there's reasons not to freeze steak because it will change the texture of the steak, which is because of ice formation. But that's a different discussion. But let's say you have a frozen steak and you put it in the pan. I can imagine it being bad because like it will fry very quickly outside, but inside it's still ice, which means it's not fully cooked. So I can imagine that being one reason, and that's why you want it to thaw completely before you fry it.
Hmm.
I can imagine. I don't know for everything because I think some things it wouldn't matter. I think if you cook something, let's say you have like frozen beans and you put it in and you make like a chili or like any type of stew or whatever, you would just put it and you let it cook for a long time. I don't think it makes a difference.
Okay.
I personally don't think. I think it can make a difference for like the texture of things, right? How is it disintegrating and
Mm.
like losing its texture? Maybe could be, but that you have to ask a cook or like a food scientist because that's not me. I don't think it.
So it's more about the experience than about the actual nutrients. What you're saying is,
I think so. I don't know
okay.
for sure. I don't. I
That might
wouldn't.
make
I
sense, by
wouldn't
the
know.
way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it just more changes what the food feels like because it's more because it's like speeding up something like you have ice forming and then thawing, and what actually happens, and you probably notice is that ice breaks things, right? So if you have a bottle of water and you put it in the freezer, it will break, it will burst
Yeah.
because ice expands and then it shrinks. And if you do this to food, this happens too. Like some of the structure in the food breaks, and I think you notice it when you
Yeah.
freeze something and thaw it, it becomes mushy, right? It becomes like ugh, gross.
It is true. It changes. Yeah.
But it shouldn't theoretically change the nutrient content. I don't think it will, but it
I
will
have so many
change the
questions.
yeah.
So let's see that I don't lose them. So one is I can tell you in rapid pace, and then we can discuss each of them. So
Okay,
one is
should I
related.
take notes or
Yeah, I don't know. Let's see. So one is related. A couple related to freezing. One is why alcohol does not freeze and water does. That's the first.
okay,
This
that's a physics question. I can answer for sure. Yeah.
Okay. Then
Um,
there's another
uh,
one related to still related to freezing, um, which I lost, and then there's another one related to why burning. So when you cook, when you heat something,
mhm,
it tends to burn, right?
mhm,
That's
mhm.
clear because the it alters the state of like the actual. But then why is it bad for your health to actually ingest burned food? Like
Okay,
why is
okay.
that? Yeah.
Lots of things. It's super cool. It's super cool stuff, and actually, I love talking about this stuff because there's so many things that people kind of know but not really, and I love explaining
Right.
them. And actually, all of these answers, theoretically, people learn in school, but I think they're not taught well, so people don't realize that that's what they're learning.
Right.
But this is super fun. So let's do it. Um, First of all, what is freezing? Freezing, when we say freezing, we mean that water turns into ice, right? But different things can freeze, and usually we talk about water. But like for example, oil can also freeze, and alcohol can also freeze, but they freeze at different temperatures because the
Right.
molecule is different. They will just freeze at a different temperature. So um, any material, any like pure substance can have three states, like generally gas, liquid, or solid, right? Even metal, like if you have iron or some other metal, you can melt it, right? It becomes
Hmm.
liquid, but at very very high temperatures, like we're talking thousands of degrees, not like 100 degrees, but like thousands of degrees. And
Hmm.
if you heat it more, it will become a gas. Like most people don't think of like metal being able to be a gas, but it can be a gas. Okay, so but it has to be very, very, very hot. So, but
We're
usually when
talking
we say
planetary problems. Yeah.
yeah, so like the
Yeah.
sun, right? Like
Yeah.
this kind of heat.
Yeah.
Anyway, so usually when we say freezing, we mean water, because water is like the most important molecule on our planet. What everything is about water, right? Like
Hmm.
the cycle of life is about water. So
Yeah.
usually when we say something is freezing, it's water freezing. But alcohol can freeze too. It's just that alcohol freezes at a different temperature. That's all. If you mix water and alcohol, it will also freeze, but at a different temperature. That's all. So it's the freezing temperature is somewhere between alcohol and water, because what happens when something freezes, you have water molecules, and we don't have a whiteboard here, it's just it's just a podcast, but water molecules actually look like little, how should I describe, they're like little triangles, let's say,
Okay.
and they form like a what we call a crystal. So when ice forms or anything freezes, they form into a crystal, like a little, like a 3D
Hmm.
lattice, like a very regular structure. And when that happens, one molecule of water like binds to the one next to it, and it binds to the one next to it. So it's like a chain in all directions, but it's a very regular chain. And this is called ice formation. And when this happens, uh, water actually expands a little bit. And this is actually, water is actually a special case, because as far as I'm aware, no other molecule expands when it freezes. Most other molecules shrink when they freeze,
Okay.
but water is the one exception where it expands when it freezes, and that's why your water bottle bursts when you put it in the freezer.
Which,
Um,
by the way, another. So I got the third one that I was missing in my brain. So the which is related. So the fact that
I
you
think
she never.
I think you're a secret scientist. You just didn't study science, but actually,
Yeah.
you kind of want to study science, I think.
Yeah, I think so. So I want to study a lot of things. So the freezing and unfreezing multiple times, right? So that's so. By the way, there's a my uncle taught me a little trick which I think
Hmm.
might be useful. So to figure out, let's say you have your apartment, your house, you have a freezer, you have to leave. How do you know if the light went off and potentially like you're freezing the stuff that was frozen is not anymore and now it's back, maybe you come back after a few days and everything seems normal, but how do you know that the freezer went off and on again and basically unfroze stuff and then it froze again, which is apparently very bad, and it's a question that I have for you, right? And so his trick was like put a glass of water
Oh
and
yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay.
make it freeze and then put a coin on top. And if the coin is at the bottom of the glass, it
Yeah.
means that it unfroze and then froze again,
Very,
right?
very clever. Very clever.
Which is
Very
fun.
clever. Yeah,
But
super clever.
why is it true that like you freeze and unfreeze stuff and it actually like that process of multiple freezing actually is bad for your health? Is it?
Okay. I think it's kind of related to what I already said before. So there's two things happening when you freeze and unfreeze. One is that as you freeze, the water expands and shrinks. If you do it several times, it just breaks. It breaks the texture of the thing. But that doesn't mean it's bad for your health. It's just like, I think it makes the food like mushy. It doesn't, it's gonna become weird. The food becomes weird. As for bad for your health, I think what can happen is that depending how long you unfreeze it, and again, so there's like the limit of my knowledge, but I think if you unfreeze something, bacteria start to grow, and then you
Mm,
freeze them again. And then every time you unfreeze it, they grow a little bit more, and then you freeze them again. And then you unfreeze, they grow a little bit more. So it's just like leaving them out, but it's actually, I don't think it's as bad as people say, because it's not worse than just leaving them outside. So I think if they're in the freezer, even if sometime they were unfrozen, it's still better than them being outside completely. So that's my
right. And it also didn't, it never made sense to me because like with ice cream, you tend to do it a lot of times, right?
yeah.
Let's say you have a big bowl of ice cream, you don't finish it, you
Yeah.
bring it back
But
to the fridge.
you do notice that the top of the ice cream becomes weird, right?
Yeah.
After
Yeah.
freezing and unfreezing. Like that's why I don't like eating directly out of the thing, because like the texture of the, because it freezes
Right.
and unfreezes, so it becomes like icy on the top and so on, and I don't like it. But it doesn't necessarily become bad for your health. I
Mhm.
don't think so. Um
Okay. Interesting. And the last question I was related to burning food
yeah, yeah.
and why is it bad? Like when you eat burned,
Yeah,
like
yeah, very good.
yeah.
So burning, do you know what burning is? It's actually very related to something we said earlier. Do you know what burning actually is? Like combustion, it also has a chemical definition.
I don't know the chemical definition, but like when you burn something, it basically alters the state, right? It's another state.
Yeah.
It's like
It's actually, burning is the same thing that happens to the sugar in your body. Your body like
mm,
literally burns things. And that's why, and this is actually very cool, we actually can measure energy content of a thing in calories. And it doesn't matter if it's food or something else. So for example, a piece of paper, which is not food, if you burn it, it releases energy, and that energy can be measured in calories. So actually what you do, and this is really true, what you do with food to when you have the food
yep,
package labeling, it says like how many calories it has.
yeah.
They actually go to a lab and burn it and measure the heat it produces, and that's how they find out how many calories it has. Not they don't give it to a person and see what happens. They
Hmm.
actually they put
Very
it in
cool.
a little thing, they burn it, and they measure the heat it produces when you burn it. So burning let's say you have sugar and you burn it with a flame on the stove. It's exactly the same. Oh, not exactly, but it's
But
almost
wait. When you digest, you don't burn.
you burn.
You
You
burn?
literally burn things. Yeah. So you don't burn it with fire, but the chemical process is also a
Okay.
combustion. So what happens? So the chemical definition is that you have a molecule containing some energy. Usually it's a molecule made of carbon and some other things. So that we get back to our macronutrients. This is great, actually. So the macronutrients are fats and carbohydrates and proteins. All of them contain a lot of carbon. Carbon likes to burn. Okay, so if you have carbons chained up, they like to burn. The same is true for petroleum, right? Petroleum is just
Hmm.
actually
Hmm.
many people don't know, but petroleum is literally very old dead uh, animals and plants. It's just really like plants and animals and bacteria, so living things that have been under the earth for a long time, then turn into petroleum. So it's kind of like
That's why they call them fossil fuels, right?
exactly, that's why they call them fossil fuels. They're actually fossilized living things. So algae and plants and animals and so on, they turn into petroleum after a long time. And so they still contain this energy in carbon. And if you take some, so let's do sugars because it's the most common example. You have like it's a chain of carbons with some oxygens and some hydrogens. Those are all atoms, and they like chain together. And then if they react with oxygen, they turn into CO2 and water. That is a combustion. So this chemical equation: carbohydrates plus oxygen turns into CO2 and water is just a combustion. This is the same thing if you burn a piece of paper. It's the same thing as eating sugar. It's the same chemical thing happens, just
Mm.
on the either you do it with a flame or you do it with your stomach where you have enzymes that do it. So the enzymes help it. The enzymes the enzymes help it burn at a lower temperature. So usually sugar
Uh,
wouldn't burn at 37 degrees, which is the body temperature, but
it's like
enzymes
they
help it burn.
melt it. They don't really burn it.
No, it is still
Is that a
like
comparison?
it is a combustion. Melting,
Okay.
so melting is something solid turning into something liquid. That is what melting means. Burning means it's a
Hmm.
chemical reaction of oxygen with the thing. That is what a combustion is. It's oxygen. We talked about how oxygen is super
Yeah.
corrosive. It reacts with the molecule and turns it into CO2. That's why burning something will produce CO2, but eating something will also produce CO2. So if you eat your pasta, you actually burn the pasta and produce CO2.
Basically, everything you do, you produce CO2, right?
Exactly.
The
Whenever you
carbon
use
footprint of your life, of your activity, is
exactly,
clear. Like everything. Yeah.
because we convert energy that is contained in molecules. We convert it into movement or some other form of energy, and while we do this, we release CO2.
So we're like walking fireplaces,
Exactly.
basically.
We're walking fire. No, this is such a good metaphor. It's actually exactly true. Living things are walking fireplaces.
Mhm. Makes sense.
So this is very good because so now we already talked about macromolecules. So macromolecules are usually long chains of carbon that contain energy that we can burn together with oxygen. That's why we need to breathe oxygen, right? Otherwise we wouldn't need oxygen to turn it into energy that we can use for movement, for thinking, for everything that we do, right? That is where the energy comes from. It's contained in the sugar, and the oxygen helps us release it. And then what we do with it is we breathe out CO2 after using it, and we produce water also. So the water that we produce, usually it's we pee it out or we sweat it out.
So let me ask you a question. So the difference between of calories is mostly made of carbohydrates. Like the higher the quantity of carbohydrates, the higher the calories.
No.
Could you make no?
All three macromolecules contain calories. I say contain calories, but it's really like contain energy, and the energy can be measured in calories. And actually, as a rule of thumb, 1 gram of carbohydrates contains the same energy as 1 gram of protein, but 1 gram of fat contains 4 times more energy. And that's why fat, that's why people think fat makes you fat.
Okay.
Because like it's not that the fat actually is easier, like turns into body fat easier. It's not that. It's that 1 gram, like 1 spoon of fat contains 4 times more calories than 1 spoon of sugar. There's
So
just
you
more energy in
basically
it.
end up ingesting way more calories than you use, and that's why they accumulate.
Yeah, so it's all about
Okay.
energy balance, right? And this is the next topic, right? Energy balance. And I think everyone that like is super into working out will know these things. It's all about calories in and calories out.
Right.
You use energy by working out, by thinking, by doing whatever you do every day, and you burn more calories in the gym or like running and so on. And you get the energy, or you get the calories from food. If you eat more calories than you burn, and we say burning for a good reason. You actually burn them. So when you go to the gym, you literally have a little combustion happening of the food you ate. So you consume
Right.
a certain amount of calories. If you burn more in a day than you consume, you will lose weight. If you consume more calories than you burn, you gain weight. Wait, did I say it the right way? If you eat more than you burn, then you gain weight. If you
Yeah.
eat less than you burn, you lose weight. Exactly.
That's why calorie restriction tends to like make you lose weight.
Exactly.
But then the problem is, um, when you do a diet or calorie restriction, you have to be careful because there's an hormonal balance that's pretty much what you're suggesting, right? Like you need to have the macronutrients in the right quantity, otherwise, yes, you might lose weight, but also your body gets unhealthy, and because you don't get enough of what you need, and on a long term you need it, so you end up like going back to the like baseline diet, and you'll gain again the fat and the weight you lost.
Yeah,
That
I think there's a couple of things, because um, so eating these different macromolecules is not only about the energy they contain. It's about different things. It's about the energy they contain, but it's also about how they affect your hormonal levels, and also different macronutrients can be used for different things that are not energy production. And this is super important. For example, fats and carbohydrates are made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen.
Mhm.
However, proteins are made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and nitrogen, and phosphorus. And the nitrogen is actually the most important part, because you cannot build tissue without nitrogen, and protein is the only source of nitrogen that humans can use. So
Mm.
if you don't eat protein, you will die. Period. You will not survive. You can live without fats, you can live without carbohydrates, but you cannot live without protein, because for example, we talked about this in the podcast with Jason. Protein is made of amino acids, right? So there's a
Mhm.
smaller units that are turned into these bigger units called proteins, and some of these amino acids cannot be made by the human body, so they need to be ingested with food. And I give you some examples. So I think there's leucine and isoleucine and valine. I think all three are essential amino acids, and they're super important for muscle growth. You cannot make them in your body. You cannot turn sugar into amino acids without nitrogen. So you need to ingest them to make tissue, to make proteins for your muscles, but also for your skin and for your hair and so on. That's why people who don't eat protein like for a long time, they will lose hair, their skin will turn bad, they will lose muscle and so on, and eventually they will die. You can use protein to gain energy, but most of the time your body will use sugars or carbohydrates for energy, and sometimes fat. Usually protein can be used for energy, but usually it's used to build new tissue, and that's why protein is actually arguably the most important nutrient, because it will help you build new tissue.
Mhm.
You cannot build new tissue only with carbohydrates and fats, but you can with protein. So that's very, very important. And then, this is one of the classes of essential micronutrients that we talked about. Even though it's debatable if they're micronutrients or macronutrients, are some of the essential amino acids, because you need them for tissue building, not only for energy, right? So I think if we talk about macronutrients, we talk about protein for energy, but some of the amino acids are essential to build new tissue, and some of them are also precursors for other molecules that your body needs. For example, um, tryptophan is an amino acid that's in all your proteins. So even your muscle contains tryptophan, that is part of the protein. However, tryptophan itself, when isolated from the proteins, can be turned into neurotransmitters like serotonin. And as you know, if you don't have serotonin, you will be depressed, and eventually you will die if you run out of serotonin. And this is true for many neurotransmitters and hormones and so on. Like certain essential amino acids are required to build these molecules
Mm-hmm.
for your body to function properly. So this is very important. It's not only about energy.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
Yeah. Did you have a question? Otherwise, I mean, we can.
No, the question I had was related to but you didn't answer about the
Oh,
eating
the
burnt
burning.
food.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't answer. That is correct. So, when you burn things in your body in a controlled way, right? It's very controlled. You simply turn like the sugars into CO2 and water. However, if you burn something at a very high temperature, the higher the temperature, the more uncontrolled the burning gets. So it's not only the sugar burning, it's also other molecules starting to burn, because once the temperature gets very, very high, other molecules start burning too.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And there's the problem with burning different things is that there's byproducts that are unhealthy. So if you have uncontrolled chemical reactions, some of the molecules that get created in the process will be toxic, and they could be carcinogenic, and this is very often the case. Like usually when you char something, actually we all like that. I think many people like the taste of charred things. People also like the taste of cigarettes, I guess, even though super
Yeah,
unhealthy.
which is crazy, huh? Like you like to burn, like you eat a steak.
Yeah.
Steak has parts that are burned, especially burned fat,
Yeah.
right? The fat part of the.
Yeah.
It's amazing, but it's actually the unhealthiest thing you can eat,
Yeah. So
right?
what's funny about this, and I think so, I'm not an evolutionary biologist, but I think I know why that's the case. So humans, when most animals, no, actually no animals cook their food. Humans are the only animals that cook their food.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons that we got so powerful is that we started cooking our food. And cooking our food does a number of things that are good for us. So one is that it helps us break down the molecules in the food that make it more easily digestible, right?
Mm-hmm.
So some molecules, some like say starches and so on, they like cooking will pre-digest them a little bit, right? So it
You
makes it
risk not digesting some of the starch otherwise, right? It's just
exactly.
the
So it helps us
input
digest it
output.
better.
Yeah,
Exactly. It helps us. It's like pre-chewing. Like cooking is
yeah,
pre-chewing,
yeah.
and even more importantly, cooking kills bacteria, and
Right.
many animals
Hygienic.
die from like eating bad food, or like they get very sick. And if you cook your food, it's much healthier for like not eating bad things like bacteria and so on. You don't get infections and so on. And this is why we started like really growing so much. I think, well, one of the reasons is that we started cooking our food. And I think evolutionarily what happened is that we started liking some of the byproducts of combustion, because of it trained us to like cooked food more. And that's
Mm-hmm.
why certain byproducts taste good to us, because it makes us want to cook our food, and that's why we survive better. And the byproducts that we like, for example, are caramelization is a very famous process that happens when you cook certain things, like when you cook sugars, but also like when you fry your fries, or like you fry onions, right? Like it's a reaction called, I think it's called Maillard reaction. It creates molecules that taste really nice, right? They
Yep.
taste really good to
Yep.
us, and that makes us want to cook our food. But there's some molecules that are produced that are bad for us. So if we cook it too much, it's also bad for us.
So you're basically ingesting toxins. That's what you're saying, and
Yeah,
that's the reason why.
sometimes not. So like cooking a little bit, up to a point, it's good, but cooking it too much will create, or like not
Right.
cooking, but
I
like
guess.
Frying is really bad. So
Like, I guess you can make a ranking like burned pizza is one thing because burned bread is one thing, but burned fat from meat is another one.
I think
Or are the
I think
same?
there's two components. One is what molecule are you burning,
Mm.
and the other one is at what temperature are you burning it. And I think this is super important, because if you go to super high temperatures, and there now we get to the question of nutrients also. There's two things happening when you burn stuff. One is you break down the good stuff, and you create new stuff that potentially is unhealthy. Okay, so there's a famous chemical reaction, and I don't know the name of it, that produces acrylamides, and acrylamides are thought to be potentially carcinogenic. And
Right, but when you say that something like that is carcinogenic, what's the reaction that happens in our body? Like, how do we go from, okay, I'm eating something that's burned, so it's a toxin,
Mhm.
to, okay, this could lead to me developing cancer? Like, because it's not that straightforward, right?
Yeah, no, it's not straightforward. And here I'm also like getting to the limits of my knowledge. I think some some molecules, and I think we talked about it a little bit, some molecules tend to increase the rate of mutations in your DNA, just because they react with the DNA. So we talked a little bit about it with Jason. Some molecules,
Mm.
they can go into your cells and react with the DNA and cause
So they
mutations that can
basically
lead to cancer.
penetrate cells because
Exactly.
they're
Yeah.
too tiny. And because that would like be a good similarity to pollution, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's the same.
Pollution.
It's the same. Pollution is byproducts that are unhealthy. So pollution comes from combustion also, right? So pollution in the air comes from burning stuff somewhere. So it is the same thing.
But it is
Either
crazy that is the size of these molecules that actually uh, creates the problem, right? Because it seems like that, like because they are so tiny. Like pollution, you have this like PM 2.5, PM
Mhm,
10,
mhm,
right? Like
mhm.
the size of it, and like the tiniest they are, the more they can penetrate cells and just mess with the
I mean,
regular
air
functioning of the cells.
most of air pollution is directly unhealthy to your lungs, right? So it's not
Mm.
some. I mean, yes. So I think some molecules and particles will go into your blood, and then through your blood also infect other tissues. Not infect, but like attack other tissues. But I think most pollutants that are in the air are directly
Right,
attacking
but
your
they
cells.
penetrate the cells of your lungs. It's still
Yeah,
the
yeah, sure.
same.
But like
Yeah.
there's also molecules that go everywhere, right? Like, so for example,
Mm.
alcohol goes everywhere. So like alcohol is a really tiny molecule. And what makes alcohol special is that it can dissolve very well in water, but also very well in oil, which means it can actually go everywhere in your body. It doesn't matter what type of tissue it is, it just goes everywhere and it does damage everywhere. That's why alcohol is actually really terrible for you. And other pollutants are like that. So, for
Right.
example,
Smoking is the same as pollution that you like polluted
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
air
But
that you
smoking,
breathe.
depending on the type of molecule, it will either stay in your lung or also go other places, depending on what molecule it is. And it's sometimes, I mean, actually, so many times it's related to the size of the molecule, as you say, but it's
Mm.
also related to the solubility of the molecule in your blood. So some molecules just don't dissolve in your blood, so they won't go in your blood. Um, but that's a chemistry discussion. But
Okay.
the size is also important. And so, for example, heavy metals are notoriously really hard to get rid of in your body. They're like super tiny, they dissolve in your blood, and they get absorbed super easily, and then they wreak havoc everywhere. They destroy your brain and everything. So
Mm.
heavy metals are really, really bad. And
Because also they don't get like you cannot get rid of them, right?
exactly,
That's
yeah, it's really hard to get rid of them. And I mean, in general, it's really hard to get rid of things in your body that your body is not used to, because your body has no process for getting rid of stuff that it's not used to ingesting. Your body is good at getting rid of, the things that it
that's a good
expects.
point. So it just accumulates.
Exactly. So I
Those
think
things.
that's also one argument to consume a more natural diet, is that all the molecules your body knows from evolution, it knows how to deal with them. But some molecules that are new in our food because we created them, like preservatives and so on, your body might not have a way of getting rid of them well. Your body's actually really, really good at getting rid of stuff, even stuff it has never seen before. But some things are really hard to get rid of.
Yeah, but that's fascinating. There should be a way, right? Like they should figure out a way to like program the body to actually clean up things that are accumulating, like heavy
Yeah, I
metal.
mean, people are working on it, and that's the whole aging thing, right? We talked about it with Jason. It's the
Right, the fact that stuff accumulates and
exactly,
makes
exactly.
cells slower
Yeah,
and dumber, basically.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, So what did we? I think
Makes
there
sense.
were some topics we touched upon that were interesting. Let me
No,
look.
I mean, going back 1 second to metabolism, right? Because there's another big topic there. So the speed of metabolism,
Hmm.
right? So common knowledge, I guess, is the younger you are, the faster your metabolism is
Hmm.
supposed to be, because you have to grow, and so
Hmm.
your little fireplace has to burn as fast as possible
Yeah, yeah,
to sustain and grow.
yeah, exactly.
But on one end, it's weird, counterintuitive, because the younger you are, the smaller everything kind of is in your body, right? You could argue.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't think that kids burn as many calories as
Okay,
adults. It's just that compared to their body weight, they burn more.
but
Be-
they burn faster, right? So
yeah, yeah. But I mean, for their size, it doesn't mean so. If an
mm,
adult
it's
male,
related to your size.
of course, if
Okay.
an adult male has a calorie need per day of, let's say, 2,500 to 3,000 kilocalories, approximately, I think that's true for like many adult males. A child has something like, I don't know the numbers for childs, but like a small child will have less than 1,000 per day because it's small. But compared to the body size, it burns more.
Okay. It's a square meter. Okay, I see
Yeah,
what you mean. So okay, so that's so, and there's a lot of things related to the speed of your metabolism, right?
yeah,
Like
yeah.
there's a lot of regulation happening. So on one way, the slower. Let me try and come with arguments here. So the slower, I had this conversation recently with another person. So the slower the metabolism, the slower your aging process, in a way, we could argue, because you consume less of yourself. Like, because it's like the fireplace, so it's like a car, a machine. Like the less you use it, the less it like we kind of touch upon it with Jason as well, right?
Yeah,
The less you use it, the less like you can break it in a
yeah,
way.
yeah,
But if you use it too little, then there's the other issue of
yeah,
like
yeah,
things get rusty in a way, like
yeah.
because you don't
Totally,
use it.
exactly the same. Yeah, very good.
So you have to it has to be not so. So that's a bit counterintuitive, because faster metabolism, it signals that your body's functioning well, in a way.
Hmm.
If you are older and your metabolism is fast, it kind of signals that you're functioning well. But on the
Probably,
other
yeah,
end,
probably.
like faster metabolism uh, puts you at risk of like a health risk, like of diseases faster, in a
Yeah,
way,
yeah.
right?
I think so. I think you'd have to ask like experts on this, but I think as many things, it's about balance, right? So the way I imagine it is that um, um, if you're not doing anything, there's um, certain processes in your body happening that are not good for you. The more you start moving and using your energy, the better they get. But then there's other bad things happening to your body because you produce byproducts that are bad for you. Things start accumulating. So somewhere in the middle, there's like a sweet spot of like, this is how you live the longest. And I think um, the more you do in terms of, let's say,
Hmm.
working out, the more you turn on certain processes that are good for you, but also the more you turn on certain processes that are bad for you. And somewhere in the middle is the best place to be. But where that place is, I think, is very individual.
You don't want to overdo.
Yeah,
So exercise increases your metabolism rate. Yeah, that's really the speed of your
yeah,
metabolism, is that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And sleeping a lot probably lowers your
I
metabolism.
mean, the sleep itself, yeah. Uh, good question, actually.
Okay.
I,
I don't know.
I don't
I'm
know. I
curious.
think, I mean, obviously, because you're not moving when you sleep or not moving a lot, you will
Yeah.
burn less calories. But a lot of stuff only happens when you sleep. Like,
Right.
I think, like tissue building happens when you sleep and so on. But I think, yeah, on average, it must, like, your metabolic base rate while sleeping must be much lower than.
So let's consider 1 second this scenario. Like this scenario of like, okay, your body is made of lean mass, fat mass,
Hmm.
and bone,
Hmm.
right? And you exercise, and when you exercise, things happen, and your body decides, okay, wait, I was actually watching a very interesting lecture on how muscle building works,
Hmm.
and the fact that basically the logic is, which is super smart of the body, is like, okay, you do an exercise, so you move a muscle,
Hmm.
and the fastest way to build, to grow that muscle, is to bring it to failure, almost failure,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Where you're like actually exerting the maximum power that you can.
Hmm.
And at that point, the brain gets a signal, wait a second, this muscle needs to grow because we're using it more than we should have or that we were expecting. So let's stimulate growth of the muscle tissue.
Yeah, I think it's correct, except I think the brain has nothing to do with it. I think it happens directly in the muscle.
Well, you could argue that the nervous system like signals, okay, let's stimulate growth.
No,
But
I don't think it's the nervous system. I'm not an expert, but I think it's directly affecting hormonal balances, and some of them are not, like the brain. Also, the nervous system is not only the brain, right? The nervous system is everything.
mhm.
But I think the brain doesn't play a role. I don't know for sure.
Maybe it was explained in a simplistic way, I don't know.
Yeah.
But
I
yeah,
mean,
so and
there's like certain, like when you break down muscle, like certain stress hormones are released. I don't know where they're released. Maybe they're released in the brain. I don't know, but they could be released somewhere else because hormones can be produced in the brain, but they can also produce somewhere else. Like for example, your gonads also produce hormones, right? Testosterone is not produced in your brain; it's produced in your gonads. So
mhm,
I think some, but like it's not like really uh, the brain in the way that you think of it. It's not,
mm.
it's maybe it's your,
But still, it is more the logic of like, okay, I haven't been using this muscle
yeah,
so much. Now I am,
yeah,
and it's starting to become consistent,
yeah,
the usage, the increased usage, which is the point. Like if you use it once, it's not gonna
yeah,
grow much. But if you do it like recurrently, like it's like, okay, maybe we need to grow it because
yeah.
we need to be stronger on that
Your
front.
the body is amazing at adaptation, whatever it is. It can be muscle growth, but even like if your bones get a lot of stress, they will grow thicker. If your skin gets a lot of stress, it will grow thicker. Like it's the body's amazing. Like it's such an amazing system.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
So let's say that you, okay, so that happens, and but there's all sort of other things that happen when you exercise, which, like for instance, how you burn the energy that you need
Hmm.
to exercise and
Hmm.
to continue the
Hmm.
exercise, right? And the fact that you have, basically, correct me, but you have this like three real, or potentially two, uh two storage of, like, two things that you can burn to produce energy: proteins and fat.
No, and sugars.
Right, but sugars become fat, right, in your body.
No. So yes and no. So um, maybe let's talk about that for a little bit.
Yeah.
So what your body burns, what your body likes to burn is just glucose, right? And glucose swims around in your body, but it's like in your blood, but it's also like it swims around in some of your tissues. And the first the first line of defense, or if I should call it that, so let's say you run a marathon. I think that's the best one because you keep burning energy for a long time.
Hmm.
When you run a marathon, and anyone who's run long distances knows these feelings. So once the sugar runs out, you will lose glycogen. Glycogen is similar to starch. It's like a type of starch that's stored in your muscles and your liver. So there's actually sugars stored in your liver and in your muscles, and they will get burned after a while. So like I don't know exactly the time, but after a few minutes of running, your sugar runs out because you don't have a lot of free sugar flying around. Your muscles will start burning glycogen. And if you keep running and keep running and keep running, at some point you run out of glycogen. Glycogen is really fastly, like really like accessible in a very quick way. So I think I don't know exactly. It depends on the person and so on. And I would have to look it up. But I think if you run for like 2 hours, you basically burn glycogen, or 1 or 2 hours. Like
So the body first burns the fastest things it can,
it's
which
sugar,
is
sugar. Yeah.
sugar, right?
Once it runs out of the glycogen, it will start burning fats. But that's around, I think, for most people after 2 hours of working out, and then you will feel the difference. And this is what people that do endurance sports call hitting the wall. Have you heard that term?
Yeah, yeah.
So it's when you run a marathon, suddenly you feel super tired. Suddenly, like it's super sudden. And like if you run 2 hours, suddenly you're like, oh my god, I'm gonna die. And that's when your glycogen has run out. and then the body turns on the fat burning, and then you get better over time. So you just keep running, you force yourself to keep running, and then you get better, and that's when you start burning fat, and that's when you're in what's called ketosis. And people that do ketogenic diets, they know this because they're always in ketosis because they
Yeah.
don't have any sugars to burn. So this is when you burn fats, you're in ketosis. And so suddenly you feel very different. So this is when you hit the wall, your glycogen runs out, and you start burning fat.
But then what about the proteins, the muscles?
Yeah.
What, like,
So I'm not 100% sure. I think immediately you don't burn muscles, or like to some tiny extent, but there I don't want to say anything wrong. I think the rule is that your body will use muscles if it feels they aren't needed. So if you have muscle tissue lying around that is not being used, it will burn them, and then they will get smaller. But and that's why if you want to lose weight without losing muscle, you need to burn calories, but also do resistance training. So resistance training means lifting weights, basically. So if you just do endurance training, like you only do treadmill and biking and so on, you will actually lose muscle. You will lose.
right? That's the
Yeah,
thing. They say, like, if you do aerobic, you tend to have leaner muscles because you tend to burn muscles.
exactly. You burn both. I think you just burn muscle and fat. But if you give your muscles a stimulus to grow at the same time, you will not use your muscles so much. You will use more fat, and that's why
Mhm.
as you lose weight and eat less, it's important to do resistance training to avoid losing muscle because it.
Yeah, although it's easier to lose fat by running
Yeah,
than by
you should do
lifting
both. You should
weights.
do both.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But then the thing that doesn't still make sense to me is like, okay, talking back about the calories, right? Amount, input, output,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Let's say you ingest 4,000 calories
Hmm.
and you burn 3,000.
Yeah.
The extra 1,000 get to be stored in your body as fat.
Unless you do resistance training, then they get stored as fat and muscle,
Right,
extra muscle, new muscle.
right.
Yeah.
But then this means that potentially if I don't exercise
Hmm.
and I eat mostly proteins,
Hmm. Hmm.
I still generate fat from proteins.
Correct.
So it's not really about what you eat, because there's always the point of like, you want to lose weight, eat more protein, eat less carbs, but it's really
Uh,
not accurate.
it is accurate in two ways. So again, this is something where people start repeating things that are somewhat true, and then because they don't understand,
Mhm.
it turns into something that is not true. So let me explain. There's a couple of things that happen if you eat protein versus eat sugar. First of all, eating protein will reduce your appetite over time because protein makes you feel full. Sugar makes you want to eat more.
Crave more,
Yeah.
yeah.
So if you eat sugar, after many people that eat like pure sugar stuff, they know that after like 2 hours, they get super hungry again. For protein, that's different. Protein is more satiating, so it makes you feel
Mhm.
more full. Secondly, eating protein changes your hormones a little bit, and that affects your hunger and so on. But it also affects what is burnt. So like you have to think if your body, let's say your body just wants to burn 50% protein and 50% fat. Let's say it's not true. I'm just saying. Let's say that's the case. Um, if you don't eat protein, it will look for protein in your muscles. But if you do eat protein, it can just use that protein instead of using your muscles, right? So that's number one. And I think this is maybe even more important. If you do workout with weights, so resistance training, you need to. So this tells your muscles, okay, we cannot lose weight in the muscle. We have to lose weight in the fat, and we want to grow the muscle. And if we want to give the nourishment to the muscles to grow, we need to give them protein because they can't grow with sugars. They have or fats. They have to grow with
Mm.
protein. So the best thing to do if you want to lose weight but only use fat is to eat protein while doing resistance training, because then you can grow your muscles and the energy comes mostly from the fat. That's the important thing.
Mhm. Okay, that makes sense.
But yeah, in technically on a mathematical basis, it's all about the total amount of calories. But which calories you consume affects your hunger
Right,
and so on.
because even if you 3,000 calories a day, but then you do resistant training and those calories are not protein, that don't come from proteins, then you're not going to be able to have the capacity to build as much muscle as you want.
Yeah. So the way I think about it is that how much you eat defines if you lose or gain weight, period. But if you eat more or less proteins and do more or less resistance training, will dictate if you gain weight in the muscles or the fat, if you're in a caloric surplus. And if you're in a caloric deficit, how much protein you eat and how much workout you do will define where you lose the weight, if you lose it in the fat or the muscle. To be able to not lose weight in the muscle, you have to eat protein and do resistance training. And if you grow, if you eat more than you need, then you will gain. But the nutrient that you eat, or like the macronutrients that you eat, and the resistance training will define where you gain weight, if you gain it in the fat or the muscle. So it's all about directing the flow of calories.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And I guess the last question I have on this is, it is more than a question, is like an idea. Like, it's strange where the body stores fat, right? Like, it's strange. Like, there are specific places where fat gets stored, and
Yeah.
I'm curious to know, like, to understand, I guess,
Yeah.
why would it store it there? Like, why around your belly, or why like at your lower back? Like, what's up with that? Like, why those places? And like,
Well, let's think
not
about what
others?
would happen if it wasn't this way. So I think there's a good reason to store it there, but imagine you store all the fat in your hands. Imagine that. Imagine your belly stays the same and you store all the fat in the hands. That wouldn't be good.
That wouldn't be good. But there are other places.
Where would you store it?
You could store it easier on arms and legs. Then you're saying the belly's there, and it's kind of like,
No. I mean, let's talk about it. So let's say you store it in the arms. I mean, it happens, right? Once you gain a certain amount of weight,
yeah,
it
but
will.
it's later on, right?
Exactly.
Why? That's the first step. That's the first
Well,
place.
let's try to figure. I think I know the answer, but let's figure out together. So let's imagine. So your hands. Why not the hands? Why is that bad?
But because it makes it harder for you to do whatever you want to do.
Yeah, and you think having a really lean body and really heavy arms doesn't make it harder to do what you have to do?
But it's not really heavy arms, because you're not talking about like fat. Yeah, of course it's weight, but it's different kind of weight.
No, but imagine like how
Yeah,
many.
yeah, I
So
see what you
let's
mean.
imagine like a beer belly, right? It's probably like 10 kilos of fat.
But
Imagine.
let me put it this way. Okay, let me put it this way. It could be in your, like, along your spine. Would that change? Not really. That happens, but after then your belly. I understand arms and legs. You use them to move. Like, if they're heavier, everything becomes a little bit trickier. Or your neck. Like, if your neck becomes like larger,
Yeah.
it's harder to move.
Yeah.
Right? That makes sense. But your back, like, it could, alongside your spine, you could have like fat all over
You
there.
can. I think there's two things. I mean, I'm not a. I think this is a
Mm.
question for probably an evolutionary biologist. But so my understanding is that you want the fat as close to your center of mass as possible, because if you store the fat close to the center of mass, you're still able to move well. If you Once you
Mm.
have it at the extremities,
That's a good
movement
point.
becomes very hard. So, for example, if a person that has 10 kilos extra on the belly can still run pretty good, but a person that has extra 10 kilos on the legs and arms and head cannot run well. Like he will fall over or something, right? The spine, I'm not sure. I think if you have a lot of weight on the back, you might not be able to walk well, also because it makes you lean back, right? I think that's one thing, and also I think there's just no space, also. But I imagine if you have a beer
You
belly,
could have a balance. You could have a man breast, woman. I mean, women have fat in their breasts. That's a good point,
yeah. I
right?
mean, women store fat differently, and I'm not 100% sure why women store differently. I think it's just that women have wider hips, so the best place to store it for balance is around the hips and the butt and the upper legs. For men, it's more the belly. It's just because we don't have wide hips, so I think our
Mm.
back cannot support as much weight as our front, because our hips are not as stable. That's what I think.
That's a
um
good point.
so, but again, so this is kind of like where my knowledge gets to an end. I think that's something to ask for of an evolutionary biologist or something. But in general, like, the idea is that closer to your center of mass makes you be able to move better with the extra weight.
Mm.
I also think people that You know, if you've traveled with heavy backpacks, you know that having the weight on your hip is much easier than having it on your back, right? So
Yeah, that's why you
like
have those backpacks that like you can actually
exactly, and I
attach.
think that's the thing. I think like you want your hips to support most of the weight, not your
Mhm.
arms, not your back, not your neck, not and so on. So
Yeah,
it should be the most stable place to carry weight is your hips.
yeah, that makes sense. Totally. Tim, thanks. I mean, I loved it. I think there were a lot of interesting
Yeah,
pieces
we
here
covered a lot of stuff. We didn't really
that
talk about
will,
micronutrients too much, but maybe we can
yeah,
do another one on micronutrients.
yeah, we should about that, about minerals, vitamins. I
Yeah,
think there's
yeah,
a lot to say on this
yeah.
front as well.